Good morning, everybody. It's good to see all of you this morning. As Chanukah begins next week, 1 week from tomorrow night, on Thursday night, I would like to focus this morning on two different texts regarding Chanukah. And of course, we will notice immediately how both of these are really in play and very timely for the matzav in which we find ourselves now. I shared the screen with you. You should have in front of you Al Hanissim, and that will be followed by a text, a very short text from the Rambam, and we are going to go through both of those. So if you could take a look at your screen if you'd like. The bolding, by the way, is my own, and it's intentional. And we're going to go through the Al Hanissim together. After which we will discuss briefly the placement of Al Hanissim in Tefillah, both in Birkat HaMazon and in Shemona Esrei. And then we will take a look at the Rambam and notice a couple of things that make this particular wording of the Rambam unique to Chag HaChanukah. So let's begin with the text of Al Hanissim. We have the introduction, which of course we recite also on Purim. For Al Hanissim, for Al HaPurkan, we give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the Nisim, for the miracles, for the Purkan, salvation, for Al HaGivurot, for the victories, for Al HaTishuot, another word for salvations, for Al HaNiflaot, and that's another word for Nisim, and on the wondrous deeds, V'al ha-milchamot, we cannot stress that word enough today. V'al ha-milchamot, and for the wars, she'asita la'avotenu, that you, God, performed for our ancestors, for our forefathers, b'yamim hahem, b'zman hazeh. In those days, meaning long ago, b'zman hazeh, at this time of year. Okay. Let's take a look at the text for Chanukah. And by the way, keep in mind that the text for Purim of Vimei Matityahu ben Yochanan only focuses on the story of and the history of Purim, which is none other than the waging of the war against Haman, because that's the entirety of the story of Purim. Keep that in mind, because of course, there's a similar element to Chag HaChanukah, but there's another element, and that has to do with the Neirot, the lighting of the candles. As we go through Bimei Matityahu, the Al Hanissim text for Chanukah, I'm asking you to keep one question in mind, and that is, what is the focus? And you have a choice, if I may. It's a multiple choice, not test, but a multiple choice exercise of A, B, or C. A is the focus on the Nes Pach HaShemen, the Nes, the miracle of the oil, or is the focus on the Nes HaMilchama, the Nitzachon, the victory of the war, or C, is it both of the above? I'm not going to pull a D and none of the above on you because that wouldn't be fair. It also wouldn't be applicable in this case. So let's take a look. Let's analyze this very carefully. Bimei Matityahu ben Yochanan, Kohen Gadol, Chashmonai Uvanav, that speaks for itself. It was in those days of Matityahu, fine. Kishe'amda Malchut Yavan Haresha'a al Amecha Yisrael, when the evil kingdom of Yavan arose against your people Yisrael, they attempted to do the following things. They were bent on doing the following things. One, lashkicham Toratecha, to make us forget the Torah, probably referring to observance of the Torah, ulaha'aviram mechukei ritzonecha, and to remove us from the chukim of your will. That's another way of stating the same thing. It's just a repetition to strengthen the point. And then what did you do, God? You, in your great mercy, you stood for them in their time of trouble. You were there for them in the following manners. One, ravta et rivam. You argued their arguments for them. You basically came to their rescue. Danta et dinam, you judge their judgments. Again, it all means the same thing. Nakamta et nikmatam, you took revenge for them. Masarta giborim yal chalashim, you gave over the giborim, the warriors, That's referring to, of course, the Syrian Greeks, biyad chalashim, into the hands of the weak. That is referring to Am Yisrael, as we did not have any official army of any sort. Unlike today, where we are considered to have Baruch Hashem, one of the strongest armies in the world. And before we go any further, keep in mind that here we are giving thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all of this, but all of this is referring to human initiative. You were there for us. You, not you did overtly, but rather you allowed us to be the ones to play an overt role. And it's very important here. You were working behind the scenes. You gave over Masarta Giburim Yachalashim, Vrabim Biyad Ma'atim, and the many in the hands of the few, Utimeim Biyad Tahorim, and those that were Tameh in the hands of those that were Tahor. If not meant in a halachic sense, then it's certainly meant in the metaphoric sense, referring to Yavan as Tameh, referring to us as Tahor. Fine. Urisha'im Biyad Tzadikim. Again, all of these are references to the exact same two groupings. You gave them over into our hands, viz Zaydim, and those that acted imprudently, that those that acted in a manner that was a slap in the face to you, biyad oskei toratecha, into the hands of those that were dealing with your and involved and engaged in your Torah. And through all of this, ulecha asita shem gadol v'kadosh ba'olamecha, you made a great name for yourself. Ulamcha Yisrael, and for your people Yisrael, for us, asita tishuad gidola urfurkan. I highlighted and bolded those two words for you because they go back to the introductory words of Al Hanissim, Furkan and Tishuot. And you for Am Yisrael, you made a tishuad gidola, a great salvation, ufurkan, again another word for salvation, kehayom hazeh, at this particular time. So the exercise in which we engaged, are we talking about here the Nes HaMilchama? Are we talking about the Nes Pachashemen? Are we talking about both? Up until this point, which really is the meat, certainly the overwhelming majority of the Al Hanissim text of Chanukah, it focuses entirely on the war. There is no mention, perhaps yet, of the Nes Hashemen. And I would find that interesting. At first glance, at least I personally would think there maybe should be an equal balance of the two. There isn't. It's all about the Nes HaMilchama. And let's go further. And of course, you'll notice there what I bolded for you. The Achar Kach, after that, Ba'u Vanecha, and some of us recite V'achar Kain, there are two different versions. Ba'u Vanecha lidvir beitecha, your children, it's referring to Matityahu's family. We may know them as the Maccabim or the Chashmonaim. They came, lidavir beitecha. Literally, that means into the edifice of your home. It's referring to the Mikdash, of course. What did they do? The focus, notice, is not, at least not yet, on lighting of the oil, but rather, ufinu et heichalecha. They cleared out the heichal. In other words, it was in complete and total disarray. This morning, as I was preparing for today's shiur, and just going quickly through the Al Hanissim text again, just to be fully prepared for the shiur, even though, of course, I'm quite familiar with the text, as we all are, I realized that I have nothing to complain about. And what do I mean by that? My wife and I, as I assume many of us, find ourselves in a situation where we normally have a cleaner. In my particular case, it's a gentleman, and he really is a gentle man, and he's a wonderful man. His name happens to be Ahmed, so already that's very telling. And he would come to our house every 2 weeks to clean. And now we're without a cleaner. At this particular moment, Palestinians are those who live in nearby Palestinian villages surrounding Givat Zev, where I live, and there are several of them, several of these villages. Palestinians are not allowed into Givat Zev for understandable reasons. My wife and I, the truth be told, we are deliberating as to whether or not we will continue to use him once we are permitted to do so, once Givat Zev makes that decision, because it can go either way. He happens to be, from all impressions, a wonderful person, and many people in our neighborhood use him as their cleaner. That being said, we are now without a cleaner. There don't seem to be any Jewish cleaners that are interested in cleaning in our neighborhood, at least not for Avi and Herzog for whatever reason. And so we're without a cleaner. And so while we try our best to clean our home, which I suppose we really should do anyway, we find it to be in somewhat disarray as compared to when Ahmed is here. And then I said to myself this morning, why in the world does that bother me? Because I'm thinking of the Mikdash, and I'm thinking of what the Maccabim needed to do when they entered the Mikdash for the first time in quite some time. And that was Ufinu Techalecha, the text here. They cleared out the Mikdash. You want to know what a mess is? That's a mess. You have your children and your grandchildren over, and they make a mess, and the kitchen is a mess, and maybe things aren't vacuumed or as dusted as well as they should be. Well, you know what? Compared to what the Maccabim had to go through in the Mikdash, and compared to the disarray and the utter destruction in the Mikdash, I realized that not only do I have nothing to complain about, I don't think my wife and I were complaining anyway, but I have nothing to even be the slightest bit disappointed about. Certainly not in comparison to what the Mikdash looked like at that particular moment when they entered and saw what they did. V'tiaru et Mikdashecha. And then they went ahead and they halachically purified whatever needed to be purified in the Mikdash. And then I bolded for you, because finally there seems to be some mention of the second element. And that is v'hidliku neirot. And if the text would have stopped there, or if the text would have continued with b'mikdashecha, they wrote in your Mikdash, then and only then, and this is the kicker, we could assume that it was a reference to, once again, Baruch Hashem lighting the daily menorah, the daily lighting of the Menorah HaMikdash once again. So finally it's mentioned, except for one thing. It isn't. There is no mention at all of the Nes Pachashemen, of the nes of the rekindling of the menorah lasting for 8 days. Why do I say this? Because of the words that immediately follow v'hidliku neirot. So let's take a look at it, because it's fascinating. And if one doesn't focus on it, they don't notice it, and they misunderstand what is being said here, what we are reciting in Al Hanissim. What did they, the Maccabim, continue to do? V'hidliku neirot, they lit neirot where? B'chatzrot kochecha. In the courtyards. The menorah was not in the courtyard. The menorah was inside. The menorah was inside the Mikdash. So when we think, oh, Baruch Hashem, we finally are saying something, finally making mention of or giving tribute to rekindling the menorah in the Mikdash, no, we're not. There's no reference to it in Al Hanissim at all. None. This is referring to something else. And if you take a look in the book of the Maccabees, what you will see is that they then went outside, they, and probably not just the family, of course, not just the Maccabim, but many others went outside when they were finally back, and to send forth the message that we are back. Think of smoke signals, or think of wiki torches, because that's exactly what they did. They lit torches surrounding the Mikdash for all to see in all directions that, look, Baruch Hashem, we are back. It was the same type of signal that was used to send off any message in those days, prior to simply being able to send out a WhatsApp or an email like we do today. The same thing was done from a halachically for Rosh Chodesh, to signify when to others Rosh Chodesh actually was declared in Beit Din. So they declared it in Yerushalayim or in Yavne or wherever it was declared at the time. And then how did they get the message out that today is Rosh Chodesh? They simply lit whatever they had in those days, which would be akin to our wiki torches today. That's what they did. They lit lights outside. They lit torches for all to see. And everybody knew that when it came to the Rosh Chodesh time, when it's approximately when the new month would begin, that would be a sign that Rosh Chodesh has begun. The same thing is true when it came to returning to the Mikdash. Baruch Hashem, we are back. And people will see the signals, and they would realize, wow, we are back. It is no longer under the control of the Yavan, under the control of the Syrian Greeks. That's what's referred to here in V'hidliku Nerot B'chatzorot Kodshecha. And then Al Hanissim ends with, at a later date, V'kavu shmonat yemei Chanukah elu. They, meaning the halachists, established these 8 days of Chanukah, l'hodot u'lahalel, to thanks and to give praise, l'shimcha gadol, to your great name, God. Putting it another way, there is no mention whatsoever of the Nes Pach HaShemen in the Al Hanissim. It's mind-boggling. Furthermore, let's think of its placement. We recite Al Hanissim in Birkat HaMazon, and we recite Al Hanissim in Shmona Esrei. There are several different brachot in which this bracha could have been added, in which, Al Hanissim and Bimei Matityahu could have been added. It could have been added in Shmona Esrei in numerous places. In fact, we have insertions in other brachot in Shmona Esrei. For example, Anenu is recited, aptly so, of course, in the bracha of Shema Kolenu. We're asking God, we're pleading with God, we're beseeching God to please hear our voice. And so on a fast day, we recite, Anenu, please answer our prayers. That's perfectly apt. It's perfectly appropriate. Al Hanissim could have been placed in several different brachot. But where is it placed? It's placed in Birchat HaHodaya, the bracha of thanks. After Modim, after the bracha, after the paragraph Modim, which literally means we give thanks to God. And if we're not going to this morning, but if we were to focus on Modim, in Modim, we're giving thanks to God, not for overt miracles, not for the lighting of the Chanukah menorah for 8 days, not Chanukah menorah, the menorah in the Mikdash, which lasted for 8 days miraculously instead of just for one. That's not what Modim is all about. The paragraph Modim, which introduces Birchat HaHodaya, has nothing to do with overt Nisim. It has to do with Nisim that we may not necessarily think of Nisim. We recited that this morning in Shemona Esrei. Your Nisim that are with us every single day. Erev, Vavoker, V'Tzaorayim. What miracles are there with us every single day, morning, afternoon, and evening? What are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that we are all sitting here right now, Baruch Hashem, able to breathe, Baruch Hashem, able to learn Torah together, Baruch Hashem, able to live our daily lives. And especially today, we recognize just how precious that is for those that do have the opportunity to do so. But those are the type of Nisim we're referring to in Modim. And so the placement of Al Hanissim there, immediately following the paragraph of Modim, and immediately preceding the closing bracha, the culmination of that bracha of Hatoshimcha, how great is your name, God, Ulecha na'ela hodot, and to you how wonderful it is to be able to have the opportunity to give thanks. The placement is just as telling, if not more telling, than the text itself. And that is that we are giving thanks here, not for the overt miracles, but rather for what is referred to as a nes nistar, for the hidden miracles, for the gift of life itself, for the ability for us to be involved in this world, to take the initiative with the understanding that God is involved behind the scenes. And the same thing is true for Birkat HaMazon. Now think about this for a moment. What we call benching, Birkat HaMazon in the Hebrew, is a bracha for mazon, for sustenance, for food. It's about the physical. And not only that, there really are two different elements, more than two, but two main elements to Birkat HaMazon. The structure is such that the first two brachot are references to the physical. In the middle, we have the bracha, Rachem na Hashem Elokeinu OUisrael Amecha, and there we take a turn towards the spiritual. Where's Al Hanissim placed? Al Hanissim is placed within the second bracha. Al Hanissim is placed in the Birkat HaMazon, and we don't have time to actually analyze it further this morning, so a peripheral discussion of its placement we'll have to do, but Al Hanissim is placed in Birkat HaMazon when we're talking about the Mazon. In fact, the culmination of that particular bracha in which we find Al Hanissim is Al Haaretz V'Al HaMazon. We're thanking God for the physical land. We're thanking God for our sustenance, for the food. And somehow, for some reason, Al Hanissim was inserted there. And I believe it's for this very reason, because here the topic and our focus is and should be, again, not the Nes Nigaleh, not the overt miracle, not the miracles that we take a look at and go, wow, this is awesome, like a fireworks display, but rather the Nes Nistar, rather the hidden miracles and the gift of everyday life. Keep that in mind. And with that in mind, let's take a look at a halacha in the Rambam, which at first glance is something we learn as a halacha, and maybe it calls to mind another mitzvah, which we'll get to in just a moment, if I remember to do so. But it's really quite astounding when we focus on it. And again, the bolding is my own. The Hebrew text, by the way, is not my own. I took this from, I lifted this from Sefaria, so I want to give credit where credit is due, but I then did choose the particular font and size that I did, but the bolding is my own. Take a look at what the Rambam writes. Mitzvat ner Chanukah, the mitzvah of lighting of the Chanukah candles. So in this morning's shiur now, we are shifting our focus to the only mitzvah of Chanukah, which is the lighting of the Nerot. Chaviva hi ad me'od. It is very dear. It is very beloved. I want us to keep something in mind. There is no other mitzvah. And we know how numerous the list of mitzvot are. And the Rambam focuses on each and every single mitzvah in detail, in greater detail than the Shulchan Aruch, in greater detail in many cases than the Gemara. The term Chaviva hi ad ma'od is the Rambam's own term, I believe. And he does not use it to describe, listen to this, it's mind-boggling, to describe any other mitzvah beyond this one. Not any of the mitzvot of Pesach, not any of the mitzvot of the year that are mitzvot TORAH that are biblically mandated, but rather this one nes is the only one that the Rambam refers to as Chaviva hi ad ma'od. That's mind-boggling, and that's a shiur in of itself. But just keep that in mind. And then he goes on to say, so much so that v'tzarich adam lihizaher ba, a person must be very careful and meticulous about this particular mitzvah. Kidei, why? Kidei lahodia hanes, to make the miracle known. In other words, to publicize the nes. We're adding here, the Rambam here is adding here the element of pirsume nisa, of publicizing the miracle. By the way, I apologize if you're hearing any pinging at all during the shiur, is because unfortunately messages are coming through on the side and I'm not in a position to mute them right now, and I apologize for that. In any event, Kidei lahodia hanes, pirsum hanes or pirsume nisa, this element of publicizing the miracle by lighting the nerot in a public place when we have the opportunity to do so. Ulahosif, and to add on b'shevach hakel, in the praise of God, v'hodayalo, and thanks to Him. In other words, we always have a way to thank God. On Rosh Chodesh and on the Chagim, all the Chagim, we recite Hallel. And on Chanukah, we recite Hallel as well. But we're going to add another element to it because we have the opportunity to do so, and that is the lighting of the candle. So we add on to that. And thanks to God, Al Hanissim she'asa lanu, for the miracles that He did for us. And then the Rambam adds something astounding. And what makes this astounding is not only the extent to which he takes the importance of lighting the Nerot Chanukah, and that every single person must be able to do so, and must make sure to go out of their way to do so. What makes it even more astounding, at least to me, is that this is the Rambam's own initiative. This is his own ruling. As far as I know, there is no source preceding this particular writing of Rambam in which we find the following halacha regarding Ner Chanukah. We find it regarding something else, which we'll get to in a moment, as I alluded to before, but not regarding Ner Chanukah. And the Rambam adds of his own volition, afilu ein lo ma yochal, even if a person does not have what to eat. If a person cannot afford to eat, Think about that for a moment. Ela min hatzdaka, except for reliance upon tzedakah, the only way that he will be able to eat is if others prepare food for him. This is so apt for today, when there are so many that Baruch Hashem here in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz are helping out in ways to be able to feed families that really are in need. And if they're not necessarily physically poor, they are certainly in terms of they are maybe perhaps emotionally poor, or don't have the mindset right now, or even the time in which to be able to prepare food, as families often would do, because one of the two spouses is off to war right now, and everything is really in a state of havoc for so many families here in Eretz Yisrael, and they may find themselves, if not literally, then metaphorically, in this particular situation. But when we come to the literal description of a person that does not have what to eat and only is able to sustain himself or herself when relying upon others, the mitzvah of Chanukah is so great. Sho'el, he must borrow, meaning borrow fuel from the neighbor. O mocher kisuto, even selling his or her garment. Unbelievable. If this person is that poor, we know that they aren't going to have clothing either. They're not going to have more than one or two garments. That ani is required to even sell his garment in order to be able, in the words of Rambam, v'lokeach shemen v'neirot umadlik, to be able to provide himself or herself with shemen, with fuel, and with neirot, and with oil, and with the neirot, and candles, the wicks, etc., umadlik, to be able to light neirot Chanukah. Wow. That is unbelievably astounding. The focus on Hanissim is the focus on the Nitachon HaMilchama. It is a focus on the restoration of the Mikdash in addition to the victory in the war. And there's no mention, as we said, of the Nes, of the Pach HaShemen, of the Nes, of the Menorah in the Beit HaMikdash. It's God, but it's God behind the scenes. What that does then is allows us to play a front and center role. We, individuals, people, are the movers and shakers of this particular emphasis in Al Hanissim. It is we that take center stage. We are the actors. And not only does it enable us to do so, it is what God demands of us. There are times when God clearly is giving us the message in which he is stating, I'm here for you. I'm behind the scenes. I want you, though, to be the ones to take the initiative. You, my people, Ami, Am Yisrael, to take that initiative and to be the ones to take center stage and to fight for our national security and to fight for our future when the need is there. That idea was first expressed when Bnei Yisrael were attacked by Amalek upon Yetziat Mitzrayim. At that particular moment, Moshe told Yehoshua, seemingly of his own volition, he told Yehoshua, hey, guess what? I've got a new job for you. You're an army general now. In addition to Yehoshua, I would imagine being in a state of shock and maybe being a little bit, if not more than a little bit afraid. What did Yehoshua do? He did what Moshe told him to do. Bechar lanu anashim, choose for us people. This was not a situation to be in sharp contrast to, and in direct opposition to, at Yam Suf, where the Torah text tells us, Hashem yilachem lachem, then Moshe told Bnei Yisrael, what are you screaming to me for? God's going to fight for you. That was a nes niglah. That was a revealed miracle. And God indeed did it. He split the sea. But here, when Amalek attacked, no. It's bechar lanu anashim, choose for us men, v'tzei hilachem ba'amalek. You, I want you people human beings to go out and fight against Amalek. And Moshe says, I'll be there on the hilltop. I'll be there too. Umateha Elokim, God's staff will be in my hand, representing God's involvement, but it's God's involvement behind the scenes. And when it comes to our salvation, beginning with when we were attacked by Amalek for the first time, God wants us to be able to play a role of being front and center, and therefore he takes a back seat, but more than allows us to, God expects us to. And that's exactly what the Maccabee did in his Chanukah, and that's exactly, Baruch Hashem, what our Chayalim, our Chayalot, and all those involved in so many different ways in this effort are doing. We're taking the lead because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking a back seat and sending us the message of Al Hanissim, which is, we all want this nace. We desperately need this nace. And I, God, am asking of you, and I'm expecting of you to come to the fore, to be the actors on the stage. And Baruch Hashem, we are answering possibly in ways that have never been seen before in our entire history. At the same time, we not only recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved behind the scenes and is giving us this beautiful opportunity to play this role in his being there for us and seeing us through. At the same time, the Rambam focuses here and elsewhere, he focuses on the war, but here he focuses on the Nes Pach HaShemen. And he tells us, Chaviva hi ad ma'od. This Nes of the Pach HaShemen is so precious, it is so dear. Because when we light the menorah, to me, what we are doing, and when we light the Chanukah and kindle its lights beginning 1 week from tomorrow night, we are now shifting from our role to God's role. Or maybe more importantly, and better said, we're not really shifting, we're adding the element of God's role. And that's indeed what the Rambam says. Take a look at his words. When we light the Neirot Chanukah, the Rambam says on line 2 on your sheet, ulehosif, to add on an element to the thanks of God. In our lighting of the Ner Chanukah, to me, what Rambam is actually saying here between the lines is we are adding another element to our celebration and to our thanks. We are thanking God for the Nitzachon HaMilchama and for giving us that opportunity to be involved. And at the same time, we're adding on that element of the overt role that God played, the overt role of the Shemen only being enough to last for 1 day, as it was when the opportunity presented itself, lit every single evening in the Mikdash, and miraculously lasting for 8 days. There's no greater Nes Nigla than that, at least when it comes to the story of Chanukah. And so we're adding in that element as well. And Chanukah is about both. Parenthetically, I mentioned earlier that there's another mitzvah in which we find the extent to which the Rambam takes this halacha, that a person who even is so poor that they have to rely on tzedakah, that they then have to go to great lengths to be able to perform the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. While this is the Rambam's own ruling, with apparently no precedence, there is a precedent in another halakha, in another chag, and you may have picked up on it, and that's Chag HaPesach. We're there already in the time of the Mishnah, and the Gemara expounds upon it further, that when it comes to the Arba Kosot Yayin, when it comes to the 4 cups of wine, and one could certainly say that by definition, as Amalachas too, also when it comes to the matzah and when it comes to the maror, because those are mitzvot de oraita, or at least maror at one point was, and Emir Hashem will be again. But when it comes to the Arba Kosot Yayin, the Mishnah makes it very clear that one must go out of their way, and the community must go out of their way to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to participate in the mitzvah of Chag HaPesach. Close parentheses, and getting back to what we were discussing just a moment ago, and that is that if we take into account the text of the Hanissim, and we take into account this beautiful, precious halacha of the Rambam, he refers to the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah as being chavivahi ama'od. I'm going to add that this particular line of the Rambam, this particular halacha, Hilchot Chanukah, Perek Daled Mishnah Yud Bet, it itself is chavivahi ad ma'od. I don't even know if the Rambam realized just how beautiful the particular wording is that he chose for this particular halacha. When we take both of these into account, we realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu welcomes our initiative, provides a space for human initiative, and not only requests, but even demands our initiative. And at the same time, while we, Baruch Hashem, are rising to the occasion in so many ways, and again, it cannot be stressed enough that this particular is applicable to, and our thanks are given on a constant basis to all those involved that are really at the fore, front and center. At the same time, we look forward to the time when the overt nes, when the nes Pach Hashemen does have the opportunity to actually become front and center in the manner of the pasuk with which we include Aleinu from Tanakh, and that is V'haya Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, when the entire world will realize, not just Jews, but every single human being on the planet will realize that God indeed is and does reign supreme al kol haaretz by Yom Hahu, on that day, and the Yirtzeh Hashem, that day will come soon, where Yeh Hashem echad u'shemo echad. Okay. I particularly find just a tremendous amount of CHIZUK in these particular words, meaning of the Rambam and of the Hanissim text, and analyzing the two side by side. I hope that all of us this morning were able to gain some CHIZUK from this. And I just want to end again by, I know it gets to the point of, it can never get to the point of ad nauseum, but it gets to the point of repetitiveness, but it really can't be stated enough. And that is our thanks to all of those that are involved in literally giving their lives, and family members that have given up, those that are alive, given up their own family members that unfortunately they will never have the opportunity to see again. We can never be grateful to them enough for all that they are doing, and for everybody that is involved for all that they are doing on behalf of OUIsrael during this particular milchama. We will always be forever grateful.